It's of course an honor to me to be here in Strasbourg and to address you all in this assembly representing the Swedish chairmanship of the Committee of Ministers. I find it fitting to set my report to you squarely in the frame of the values on which the Council of Europe were built almost 60 years ago: democracy, human rights and the rule of law. The raison d'être of the Council of Europe is, as we all know, to secure peace and prosperity in our part of the world. Foreign Minister Carl Bildt reminded us in his June speech that we never can take peace for granted. Almost 20 years ago, President Gorbachev spoke in this assembly and referred to the common European home. This summer's tragic events in Georgia have shown that we still have a lot of work ahead in building the common European home, and how right it is to keep reminding that we must not take peace for granted. The conflict within Georgia and between the Russian Federation and Georgia is a serious challenge to the international community as a whole, endangering European peace and stability, and consequently a serious challenge to the Council of Europe and the values it stands for. There have been violations of the statutes of the organizations, as well as the obligations and commitments undertaken by the two member states. The undertaking to settle dispute by peaceful means, as well as other specific commitments made at the accession of both the Russian Federation and Georgia, have been ignored. The statute's fundamental principles of cooperation and respect of international law, in particular state sovereignty, the right to territorial integrity, and the inviolability of frontiers of states, have been infringed through military action. It is the Chairman's view that the Georgian actions on its territory must be seen in the light of Georgia's obligation under human rights and international humanitarian law. The methods that were used by Georgia to control its territory raises serious concerns as to their compatibility with its obligations. However, the military action undertaken by Georgia on its territory can never be seen as an aggression towards the Russian Federation, which would trigger the latter's right to self-defense. It's furthermore clear that since it contravenes international law when a state uses military forces to protect its citizens in another state, the Russian Federation's large-scale military actions in Georgia cannot be justified as self-defense. Nor is the protection of peacekeeping forces such a basis for the use of force under international law. The use of military forces by and in support of peacekeeping forces is governed by the mandate and other rules pertaining to them. The large-scale military action by the Russian Federation against Georgia cannot be justified on these grounds. The conflict in Georgia has received the full attention of the Committee of Ministers. The Chairman concluded at the end of the ministerial meeting in New York on September 24th that the armed conflict between the Russian Federation and Georgia, within Georgia, and its consequences for the respect of the principles and standards of the Council of Europe are of utmost concern. The situation, he concluded, is a serious challenge to the organization and the values it stands for. Security and development must be based on peaceful settlement of national and international conflicts, as well as respect for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of states. Following the Russian Federation's recognition of Abkhazia and South Ossetia, the Chairman made a statement in which he condemned this decision and underlined that it seriously jeopardized the possibility of a peaceful resolution of the conflict in line with the principles of international law and contradicting the fundamental principles of the Council of Europe. This and the steps taken by other Council of Europe bodies, in particular the Parliamentary Assembly and the Commissioner for Human Rights, have been detailed in the Chairmanship's report to the extra informal meeting of the Committee of Ministers, which again took place on 24 September in New York, in the margin of the United Nations General Assembly, with 32 ministers participating. I understand the report as was just mentioned by you, Mr. President, has been distributed to you together with the chairman's summing up of the meeting. In short, the meeting reaffirmed the seriousness of the conflict and its consequences. The conflict has caused loss of human life and great suffering among populations, including a large number of displaced persons, as well as consequences for the democratic security in the region. Business as usual is not an option for a value-centred organisation. This situation requires, we feel, a clear response from the Committee of Ministers in line with the Council of Europe's core objectives of preserving and promoting human rights, democracy and the rule of law. The summing up of the chairman suggests that enhanced monitoring by the Committee of Ministers of the Russian Federation's and Georgia's obligations and commitments to the Council of Europe should be established. The result should serve as a basis for the Committee of Ministers to decide on such an action plan, including cooperation and assistance with the aim to ensure respect for Council of Europe principles and standards. The cooperation between the Council of Europe and the Russian Federation and Georgia, respectively, should be enhanced in order to strengthen the implementation of human rights, democracy and the rule of law. An enhanced Council of Europe presence in the two countries could be necessary. This means, President, reallocation of resources. The meeting furthermore supported the 6 principles for urgent protection of humanitarian rights and humanitarian security set out by the Commissioner in the special report he published on September 8, 2008. It's paying particular attention to the contribution the Council of Europe can make to implement them. The chairmanship is closely following your Assembly's urgent debate on the consequences of the war between Georgia and Russia this week. The Assembly's contributions in terms of gathering information on the current situation on the ground and identifying proposals for future action is of great value to the Committee of Ministers. Throughout the crisis, the chairmanship has had very close contacts with the other international bodies concerned, in particular the United Nations, the European Union and the OSCE. On September 15, Foreign Minister Bildt, together with the OSCE chairman in office, the Foreign Minister of Finland, Mr. Alexander Stubb, met for a high-level meeting between the two organizations and called for a strict adherence to the 6-point ceasefire agreement which had been mediated by the French European Union presidency. In accordance with the 6-point plan, Minister Stubb and Minister Bildt noted that it's fundamental that the Russian Federation troops return to their position prior to August 7. They also recalled that as member states of the Council of Europe and participating states of the OSCE, both Russia and Georgia are bound by human rights obligations and commitments which must be respected in all circumstances. Mr. President, I take it that you have all received the written communication of the Swedish chair, providing you with details of the progress of the committee's work over recent months. And I will now only highlight a couple of points that are of particular importance to the Swedish chairmanship. Sweden continues to work in line with our main priority to implement the Warsaw decisions to focus on core issues, to make rights real for the European citizens, to quote a well-known phrase. The Swedish chairmanship has pursued its action in favour of consolidating the Council of Europe system of human rights protection. Following the colloquy entitled Towards Stronger Implementation of the European Convention of Human Rights at National Level, held in Stockholm on 9th and 10th of June, concrete proposals for actions will be submitted to the Committee of Ministers next week. Efforts for implementing the Convention at the national level are extremely important. If rights are guaranteed at the national level, there is no need to turn to Strasbourg for help. The European Convention on Human Rights and the European Court of Human Rights are our most important instruments for achieving this.